of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Conformément à l'article
Pursuant to Standing Order 1083H, the committee is meeting for a briefing session with the Interim Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner.
Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and using the Zoom application remotely. I'd like to make a few comments, if I will, for the benefit of our witnesses and our members. We've been gone for the summer, so just need to recognize these few facts. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you'll have a choice at the bottom of your screen either the floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Although the room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to a microphone. We therefore ask all participants to exercise a high degree of caution when handling the earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. In order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of the interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone into which their headset is plugged in, and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on the table away from the microphone when they are not in use. Je vous rappelle que toutes les...
A reminder that comments between members must be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience in and understanding in this regard.
In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for today. First, from the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, Mr. Conrad von Finkenstein, Interim Conflict of Interest Commissioner and Ethics Commissioner, and Lynn Robinson-Dalpé, the Director, Advisory and Compliance. Mr. Commissioner, you have 5 minutes to address the committee. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you today.
Acknowledging that our meeting space is on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. I feel privileged to have been asked by the Governor and Council to take on this role on an interim basis while a new Ethics Commissioner is being sought. With me today, as you mentioned, is Lynn Robinson-Dalpé, Director, Advisory and Planning and Compliance. Sorry. Les rapports annuels du Commissariat sur
Annual reports on the Conflict of Interest Act and the Code were tabled in Parliament today. The reports show the ways that the Commission examined its role and the application of the rules. I would like to thank the personnel that carried out this work over the past 6 months. Transparency, integrity, and accountability are essential to the democratic process. The public needs to have faith in how decisions are made and implemented. For this reason, we have the Conflict of Interest Act and the Conflict of Interest Code for members of the House of Commons. It is my intention to administer these in an open and transparent manner in a climate of collaboration and mutual respect. Your committee plays an essential role, and so I'm excited to have a constructive dialogue with you. I am committed to fostering an environment of openness and communication as the exchange of ideas produces the best results.
Commissioner is multifaceted. It extends beyond ensuring compliance and providing numbers. It also encompasses consideration of individual responsibility and ethical issues for individuals subject to the Act or the Code. The Ethics Commissioner acts as a moral compass by providing guidance on decisions that challenge ethics or integrity to ensure alignment with legal and societal standards. In today's interconnected world, the actions of a public official have far-reaching consequences. Ethical missteps can lead to reputational damage, financial losses, or legal repercussions. Regulatees can seek guidance from the Commissioner on personal conflict of interest matters to prevent compromising of objectivity when personal and professional interests intersect. Hopefully, by seeking counsel, public officials can make informed, ethical choices that foster trust, public transparency, and long-term success. J'ai l'intention de profiter de
I will draw upon the expertise and the insights of my provincial and territorial counterparts, who are already on the ground and who will certainly have useful insights and ideas. In fact, just after my appointment, I spent a couple of days at the annual meeting of the Canadian Conflict of Interest Network, which allowed me to build valuable relationships and gain an insight into our common challenges.
In closing, I'm eager to embark on this journey with all of you to serve Canadians and strengthen the foundations of our democracy. I'm grateful for the opportunity to introduce myself today and look forward to further dialogue with you. Thank you for your attention, and I would be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Right on, well, just a little bit under time. That'll leave more time for questions. We're going to start our 6-minute rounds now, and I'm going to go to Mr. Barrett. Mr. Barrett, you have 6 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner and Ms. Robinson-Delpay, for joining us again. Appreciate the opportunity to ask questions and get more information on behalf of Canadians. Commissioner, perhaps in your reading of the news over the last year prior to your accepting this appointment, or since your having assumed the office, you're familiar with the Prime Minister having spent the new year at the Prospect Estate in Jamaica. This is owned by Peter Green's family. Now, Mr. Green is the godson to the late Pierre Trudeau, father of the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Now, Mr. Green's son, Alexander, in turn, recently made a large donation to the family foundation that, of course, shares the Prime Minister's name, of which he is involved. And the cost to Canadians was $160,000. They don't know if they paid for the $9,000 per night fee that the Prime Minister would have incurred if he were not there at the invitation of the donor to the Trudeau Foundation. So in relation to this trip, what we're looking to find out is who approved the trip from the Ethics Commissioner's office and on what date that approval was given to the Prime Minister or to his office.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for sending me in advance a letter of your concerns. Let's start from the beginning. We don't approve travel. There's no provision in the Act that we don't do that. What we do is we approve of, if somebody receives a gratuity or a gift, he or she can come to us and ask, is this okay, or do I have a problem, a conflict of interest? And we give him an answer. We do that on a confidential basis. It's up to the requester to decide whether he wants to make it public or not, etc. We do not comment on any of this. In this case, all I can assure you that I assume I wasn't here. It's the most that it's in issues of this nature, a request would have been made and an answer would have been given.
Do you know, Commissioner, on what date that that exchange was finalized between, if you can't comment on the nature of the advice provided, do you know on that it occurred?
You're trying to put me in a very complicated position. I'm not supposed to. The advice is confidential, and there's a flight took place, and I can only assume. Actually, let's not be pussyfoot around here. Yes, I can tell. Advice was sought before he went on his trip, and advice was given. If you want to know the nature of the advice, you have to ask him, not me.
Well, we'd be pleased to put questions to the Prime Minister if he'd come to committee, but we can't get any of his caucus even to be here. How do you think that in relation to this type of trip, where we have $160,000 that taxpayers are on the hook for, and you have this relationship with the Prime Minister's Foundation, a donor giving a trip to the Prime Minister, it has shades of the Trudeau Report 1 that your predecessor ruled on with respect to the Prime Minister's illegal vacation to Bell's Cay. He was in violation of the Act. How can the Act and the Code be strengthened to prevent this type of ambiguity and these contraventions of the law that we've seen, as detailed in the Trudeau Report 1?
First of all, you're making a certain stipulation here. You say 160,000. I don't know where that figure comes from, what it's based on, anything. But be more to the point, I don't have opinions. I deal with requests. I deal with requests of judgments where people come to and tell them whether they comply with the existing law or not. That's my function. My function is not to give opinions or talk about how things look, but whether people have complied with the rules or not.
Is there a backlog of investigations in your office?
At present, we have we have eight open cases in which involved 11 people.
8 open cases which
Yeah.
involve 11.
When I be careful when I say cases, it means if something has been referred to and we look at it, doesn't necessarily mean it will result in an investigation or something like that. There's 8 cases where people have brought things to our attention which we're looking at.
And with a 6-month appointment, how do you plan to address that backlog while also addressing any new matters that are referred to or discovered by your office in order to maintain public's confidence that the Act and the Code are being complied with?
Look, yes, just because there was no commissioner doesn't mean the work didn't go on. And if something is referred to us, obviously we look at it, we do preliminary, we make it, and then the decision is made whether there should be an investigation or not. And once there is an investigation, obviously it becomes one. The preliminary work has been done on these 8 cases, and soon I will get a report from my people of what they recommend, and we'll decide whether to proceed, whether to dismiss them, etc. It's not a big backlog. It's perfectly handleable, and we will deal with it. The problem really arises with that this Act, in comparison to other acts, does not provide that in the absence of the commissioner, the deputy commissioner, or he may assign the proposal to something. There is nothing.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And that's really the problem.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Thank you, Commissioner. Typically, we would go to a Liberal member at this point, but we don't have any in the room. So I will start with, on va commencer avec Monsieur Villemur.
So we'll start with Mr. Villemur. Mr. Villemur, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, for being with us. And Ms. Delpy, thank you for being with us as well. As you know, we've all wondered, and we also found that it took a long time to appoint someone. I think that people from the office were doing their best, working on files as best they could, but they needed a commissioner in order to conclude a file. Correct? Yes. At what moment were you contacted for this assignment? In April, if I remember correctly. I said yes. But I was busy with my wife. We returned at the end of June, and I was asked if I was still willing to take on the role, and I had a few weeks before starting. And the appointment for 6 months, when did that start? What was the starting date for your appointment? September 3rd. You worked for the CRTC for many years. You have a very impressive background. So now, for being an ethics commissioner, what are the qualities that you have? I've worked for 39 years in government. I was part of the development of legislation and the implementation of legislation. And I was able to examine whether or not there were errors in legislation. And so I was part of the whole process of moving legislation forward. I was able to examine things in a practical way. Things need to be done correctly, but need to be easily implemented. And it needs to make sense in the day-to-day. That's a quality that is essential for such an appointment. When we understand the law, it helps, and we see the application in one's daily life. And so you understand the law and the spirit of the law. Yes. And compliance is important, but there needs to be more. You need to go beyond that, correct? Answer. Yes. You cannot forget what the objectives are. We need to be able to find a solution for things that currently aren't working. Would you be willing to have a longer appointment than an interim appointment? Answer. I would be willing to do it for 6 months. There aren't discussions beyond 6 months. Would you be interested? I haven't thought about it. I've only been here for a couple weeks, so I'm still trying to understand the intricate workings. My question wasn't supposed to be a trap. I was just wondering why we hadn't been able to find a permanent commissioner. I know it's a complex issue, but I'm pleased that it's you for the next 6 months, but our goal would be to see in the long term what's going to happen. Do you have an idea of why it's so difficult to find someone for this position? Answer. No. I think it's a very interesting position. I think it depends on people's interests, and the person who is appointed needs to have a lot of experience. You'll have to have, yes, as you say, a lot of experience. Thank you.
Monsieur Villemur, on va arrêter.
Thank you, Monsieur Villemur. We're going to move on to our Liberal MPs. I believe that Mr. Fergus will be starting. Mr. Fergus, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank Mr. von Finkenstein, and I would like to welcome you to our committee. Thank you for accepting this appointment. I would like to carry on with the same order of ideas as my colleague, Mr. Villemur. You hesitated before answering Mr. Villemur's question when he asked why a lot of people weren't interested. And perhaps this is how I should ask the question. Did you hesitate before accepting this position? Answer, no. It goes by qualifications, and I think that I have the experience. Most of my life was in government. It's something that interests me. It's something that I understand. I was told we're having a hard time filling this position. Would you do it for 6 months? And I said yes. It was very simple. Would you be interested in staying beyond 6 months? Answer, ask me the question in 6 months. This brings me to my next question. Do you think people hesitate because of the political nature of the job? Answer, if it was only about making rulings, I think it would be easy to find someone. I think it could be the political nature. A decision made by us has a political repercussion. We're living in the era of social media, and everything is always exaggerated. And we need to be careful of what we say at all times. We need to be sure that something is legal and correct, but it could be poorly received. And so that could be why people are hesitating. For me, I've always had difficult assignments, and so I'm quite used to it. Very well. Mr. Commissioner, you had a great reputation for being very professional. You have always respected the framework that you worked in. Do you believe that it's possible to be a good public servant and to have your own ideas? Apologies, my device isn't working. I would just like to know if you believe that it is possible to have your own personal and political ideas and separate that from the nature of your work and be fair and impartial. Answer, I was a judge, and my personal ideas are always things that were left at the door. One needs to focus on the case at hand, regardless of personal beliefs. And so I needed to render a decision and think about the impacts of that decision, not the impacts on me, the impacts on the person. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Judges always do this. It's not easy, and sometimes we're tempted, but it's not allowed. And it's something that we always have to factor into our work. I often ask myself whether or not my personal views are having an impact or not. And I don't think that has been the case. Sometimes we can ask a colleague for their opinion to see whether or not there's something that I may have missed or anything that may raise questions. But after a certain amount of time, it becomes automatic. We leave all our personal ideas, preconceptions at the door. I agree with you wholeheartedly, Mr. Commissioner, and I think you have shown this throughout your career. My expectations are very high, and I believe that you will continue and maintain this integrity. And all members of this committee need to recognize that it can be done fairly and impartially. I think that it is necessary, a necessary quality. Thank you, Mr. Fergus. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. We're going
To Mr. Green. Mr. Green, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome. Welcome to committee, to my committee members, welcome back. Certainly looking forward to getting back to work, and we're certainly happy to have this very important position filled, even if only in the interim basis. As my colleagues have reflected, your CV is exemplary. I certainly look forward to you continuing the good work in your public service as you've done for decades now. Your resume certainly speaks for itself. In your opening remarks, I think you noted on the issue around the need for trust and transparency and certainly accountability. And I think without having to reflect on your personal opinions, I think it goes without saying we are in a hyper-partisan kind of extreme moment in history right now. And so your transition in this position is going to be integral to the work of the government, to helping us continue to restore trust to the general public, and to ensure that, you know, without favor or without target, that any elected official within this House is held accountable for their actions. So with that being said, given that this has been vacant for some time now, what are your priorities in the first couple of weeks of your mandate?
Well, the first is to get rid of the backlog, you know, and I've done it as, for instance, as you know, ministers and secretary of states, when they have to get appointed, they become reporting office holders, and they have to put off very often things in a blind trust. They hire a lawyer. The lawyer sets up the blind trust. He sends it to us. We look at it. We say, yeah, that's fine. No changes this, and then it's done. And then the lawyer gives a bill, $20,000, let's say, or something like that. So what you do, you send it to me. And I send it over to the department and said, here, this man required by the code or by the Conflict of Interest Act had to put it in trust. This is a cost, and please reimburse them. And they do. Now, the Act says the commissioner sends it to the department. As a result, God knows how many of these things were waiting in my office. The very second day I came, I said, this is ridiculous. This is a post office function.
Right.
I delegated to somebody else here and get them out. And I can tell you today, the vast majority of them have gone out.
Excellent. Although I should say I've always found it interesting, an interesting part of Canadian parliamentary politics, that active members of parliament can still vote on individual or industries that they have individual stock holdings in. You know, I always found that a bit of an interesting thing, as it is in the States, but I digress. So with that being your first priorities, you had mentioned the backlog. Is there currently a backlog of post-employment waivers for public office holders?
Backlog depends on your definition of backlog. I think there was 3 or 4.
Oh, there's only 3 or 4. Okay. Are there any administrative monetary penalties that should be imposed in the recent months that have not been?
Again, the administrative penalties, there's a process, you know. Obviously somebody didn't comply. Then there's an investigation, and then we have Lind. here makes the suggestion that this ban should be penalized in a certain amount. It goes to the person and says, this is what we decided to give any comment or etc., any excuse, any explanation. Most of the time people say yes, da. Then both her recommendation and the excuse when they come before me, and I say, okay, look at it. Under the circumstance, that's a valid excuse. No, we won't. Or yes, this doesn't fly, and we issue the kind. There are not quite a few. How many are there outstanding?
About 20 or so.
About 20, and I will deal with them as they come up. It shouldn't be, these are not very complicated issues. And I'm sure by the end of the month they'll be gone.
It sounds like you're off to a very efficient start. Given your vast experience, particularly on the bench as a judge, as well as your deep experience within the actual government of Canada, I imagine that, given that experience, getting into this role, you're probably already seeing some challenges and things that face the Office of the Conflict of the Interest Commissioner, both in the short term and in the immediate term. What steps do you intend to take during your mandate to address those challenges? First of all, what are the challenges that you're seeing right off the bat, and what will you be doing to address them?
Well, the challenges you see right off the bat is the fact that the Act is deficient in not having a provision for what happens when the commissioner his term is expired, or is incapable, or whatever. There should be a delegation principle. It should be either he can nominate somebody, or another commissioner. We have about 3 of them who report to Parliament can step in, etc. With some provisions, that are clear deficiencies. Other than that, it's a bit premature to ask me that after 2 weeks. I think in 6 months I will have a much better idea.
Fair enough. Commissioner, the fortunate thing for you in this interim position is that we are a very active and busy committee, and I'm sure that you will be back before us in no short time. You'll be here back before us, and we'll be looking forward to maybe asking those questions again. It's always my interest at this committee to try to find systems and structural recommendations that we can provide the government and hope to strengthen the acts. And so even having you be here before us today and just suggest that these early deficiencies in delegated authority in the interim is a good piece of testimony that we'll take into consideration at committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you, Commissioner. That concludes our first round of 6-minute questions. We're now going to go to the second round of 5-minute questions, and I have Mr. Couric for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and thank you for coming before us and acknowledge fully the I'm sure what has been a very busy couple of weeks for you. So thank you for your time here. Commissioner, one of the things that I hear often from constituents is a general erosion of trust in institutions. And being a part of the Ethics Committee and having dealt with a whole host of questions around the conduct of public office holders and some of the perceived challenges that exist that have led to that erosion of trust. And with the situation where the former interim commissioner was announced, and it was quickly revealed of a close connection with a senior Liberal cabinet minister, and that she did the right thing and stepped down, which was important to not eroding that trust further. But the fact that happened, and what was certainly seen by many, and I heard a lot about it from constituents, a poor judgment on the part of the Prime Minister. And the Act clearly articulates that there has to be consultation for the appointment of a commissioner, but not an interim. And that's certainly something that needs to be addressed. But and as I was preparing for this meeting, and I as well looked at your CV, and you have an exemplary record of public service. But just because this is a question that I'm asked often by constituents, and it's about some of those conflicts of interest that are perceived to exist. So I almost hate to have to ask you this, but to just make sure that it's on the record about if you have a connection to the Trudeau Foundation, a relative of a cabinet minister, an in-law of a cabinet minister, or some of those other very, very high-profile connections that have cast doubt on some of the other situations that have contributed to this erosion of trust. So, Commissioner, I'm hoping you can comment and just put on the record exactly and to clear up if you have any of those connections that have led to, in part, some of that erosion of trust that's taken place.
To my knowledge, I have none. I have been retired for 10 years. Obviously, I have, prior to retirement, been involved with a lot of people in government, in both parties, etc. If for some, and some of them were, most of them were business relationships, a few were also personal. Should one of those come up in any other case, I will have no hesitation whatsoever to immediately recuse myself and designate somebody else to deal with it. And it would be another one of the commissioners. Let's say I would ask the commissioner of lobbyist registration or somebody like that, some another servant of parliament like me, to basically deal with this, because it's I would doubt there was something will arrive, but who knows? You know, I certainly am prepared to do that. It was the same thing with when I was judge. You know, there was one case. My daughter was articling for the firm. She wasn't on the case, and I said right away, forget it. Assign it to somebody else. I don't want it to even come up. You know, if there is the inkling of conflict of interest, I, as Commissioner of Ethics, have to lead by example. There can be no question of anything. And I don't even want somebody to be able to raise the point. I will immediately take it off the table.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I wish that we would have been able to have these conversations 7 months ago, and appreciate your candidness in answering that question. Commissioner, one of the things that we heard from now your office is that there are a number of scenarios, investigations, and files, and you mentioned some of the challenges around the Act and in terms of not having a delegate and whatnot. But the things sit on the commissioner's desk even when a commissioner is not there, and so I'm curious. That 7-month delay, that's a long time for an office to be vacant, especially an important one like this. So, and I think I have about 30 seconds left. I'm just wondering if you can tell the committee just how you plan to make sure that erosion of trust I talked about before, in terms of that 7 months of vacancy, how are you going to work to make sure that can be cleared up?
First of all, the backlog will be gone. Again, most of it was trivial. The thing that isn't trivial, I will deal with. I'm known for being efficient and quickly in making the decision. I don't sit on the decision for months. And I think very much time is a very valuable commodity. And if you don't take a decision, it corrodes. And if something's hanging over somebody's head, etc., let's deal with it rather than let a reputation corrode because there's no action. So you can be sure that will be done. In terms of trust, I think the biggest thing, and I said that in all my opening remarks, is to be transparent, to explain the process, not hide behind some rules and say, I can't say, no, I'm sorry. If I can't tell you, I will tell you why and what's the rationale was, etc. So people understand it and say what I'm doing, etc. Not because we're trying to hide something, but we're trying to protect somebody or somebody's reputation, etc. Or the rules do not allow, etc.
Thank you.
I think it's key to any confidentiality when you invoke them, that you explain the context, the rationale, and also explain if or when it can be lifted or pierced or whatever the case may be. What's the situation? That's and when I have something to say, I will share it with you. Like if one of your colleagues asked me, and I said, look, you heard me. I said, let's not pussyfoot around. That's the point.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I do that on purpose.
Thank
I want
you,
to make
Commissioner.
sure that people understand I have nothing to hide.
Thank you, Commissioner. I gave you a little bit extra time there because I thought the response was very important to the question. So thank you. We are now going to go to Mr. Baines for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Welcome back, everyone, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us. And I want to echo the statements of my other colleagues here in recognizing your exemplary public service. My first question is, it comes from an interview that took place in a mid-August interview with Canadian Press. Marion Dion stated that he was not surprised a candidate had not been chosen yet, as, quote, the field is narrow and few people would qualify for the job or even want it. So my first question is, what motivated you to, accept the role? And you mentioned you've been retired for 10 years.
Retired for 10 years doesn't mean I'm not interested in the issues. I followed him. And besides, I was retired from the public service. I did a lot of consulting and writing on telecom issues, etc. Because I like public policy. It interests me. I like it to conceive. Public can say I'm a public service junkie, and here was an opportunity. If they obviously needed somebody, they had trouble finding somebody I could be of service. Why not?
And the key challenge is you seem like someone who feels that you can fix things. You're a problem solver. So, what are the key areas that you wanted to? I know you mentioned backlog. What are some other things you think are needed?
Your colleague just mentioned trust. Restoring trust, making sure your system works. We haven't forgotten about ethics. There's somebody there who looks after it. If you have an ethical problem, you come for him advice and for rulings, etc. So it is an important part of the whole functioning of government. People have trust in it, and they feel that if there are conflicts, the conflicts will be dealt with. If there is a vacancy, there's no commissioner, and you have an office that can't act with it because the Act provides only commissioner can do it, that corrodes the trust, and that's what I thought has to be replaced.
And do you think the qualifications for the role are stringent enough? Or do they need to be relaxed in a way? Or
I think I'm just looking at them in the Act. You have to be a former judge, or perhaps to run a tribunal or something like this, and you have to demonstrate the expertise. Frankly, I don't think it's necessarily as narrow as Mr. Dion suggested. It is also a question of whether how wide you cast the net, and also what criteria you establish for appointment. As you know, I don't know how PCO does it. I've been 4 times appointed by PCO to a position. I never know what criteria they use for choose this one over that one, etc. So you'd have to ask them why they have such trouble finding the right person.
Thank you. And I know you mentioned a little bit about social media, or it was mentioned earlier. So what role of social media in holding parallel inquiries? How would you deal with that?
Well, parallel inquiries, I don't think social media holds an inquiry. What they do is they comment on it, and they prejudge it, and they put slants on evidence and on allegations, etc., which may have been proven or not. The main thing, I think, is what you do. You have to not respond to social media. Social media is there, you can't influence it, and if you try to get in it, I think it's a mug's game. The key thing is establish confidence in your process, and also do it timely. Don't let things hanging around, etc. No, this is an issue, it's before me, I will deal with it, you will hear it shortly, and when I deal with it, I will deal it on the basis of the evidence before me, the testimony, and my judgment at the end of the day. I think that's the best way of dealing with it. Don't take on new social media. Don't try to steer it or play with it or something like this. It's a mug's game as far as I'm concerned. But on the other hand, it's there, and it can be served as a very useful information to spread your message out, and if your message is consistent and is trustworthy.
Member of the staff there. I know your office has been proactive in recent years, engaging with public office holders. Do you have any statistics that you might be able to share with us in terms of how much engagement you've had and some measurables?
As you probably know, or you may not know, every quarter we publish a report. It's a status report of the activities that we've engaged in the last quarter and over the course of the year. And on the engagement side, we have been very, very proactive with reporting public office holders and members as well to offer sessions of information, to provide them with guidance, not just individually, with individual members or individual reporting public office holders, but also as groups. And so, and not only the individuals that are subject to the rules, but also their staff. So we have continuously an ongoing discussion with those, and we engage with these people to sensitize them to the rules and make sure that they abide by the rules.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Baines. Monsieur Villemur, vous êtes prochaine pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur Villemur. Mr. Commissioner, I am happy to hear you say that a lack of a personal opinion is very important. You were contacted in the past few months to be the interim commissioner, and you no doubt took the time to examine the Act and how it works. And before starting, do you have any suggestions for us on how we could improve the Act? I think that it would be good to review the Act. It would be good to know whether or not the Act is still useful. Can it be improved? The matter of delegation, for example, but something else that your colleague mentioned is that we're in the era of social media, and does that have an impact on the Act? Should we make any changes, give it more authority? If you're a minister or a Secretary of State, the Act applies to you, but also the Code. Are there any modifications that can be made to the Act or to the Code for them to be more effective? But these are things that I cannot answer now, but these are things that your committee should study. Naturally, such changes cannot be made in 6 months, but I know that you've observed the government for a long time. You also mentioned being retired. Do you have any other mandates currently? No. I am a member of a couple NGOs, but I do not have any mandates. Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
Thank you very much. In my opening round of questions, I spoke a little bit about kind of what your mandate's going to be, and certainly, you know, we've had members of your commission before us before on various matters. Obviously, budget time, when it comes up, there'll be conversations around the adequate funding to do the job. Do you feel in your early first couple of weeks, given your experience in your past kind of senior level managerial experience, are there enough resources being put into your office to be able to adequately do the work?
It's a bit early for me to say, but I'm being informed by my staff that essentially we have the necessary resources to do the job.
So when you're working through that, now that we have identified that you have the resources given the Act and the scope of the work, how are you going to go about measuring the progress within the department kind of year after year to ensure, or I guess in your short term, in your time, what would progress look like for you, and how do you plan on measuring it?
Well, there's certain measurements already in place. You know, we have turnaround data. What do you call them? The targets how long it should take to deal with requests, turnaround files, this, etc. That's obviously one way of measuring. The other one is, I think, essentially, as you know, Most of your colleagues have mentioned there's a perceived lack of trust for Zoom of right now because of the 6 months hiatus. And I hopefully can restore that they feel that the system is functioning and that the issues that have cropped up are being dealt with in a timely manner.
Is it 2 or 2.5? Okay, perfect. 3 new people were brought into the House of Commons today through by-elections. I'm a firm believer that was there 5?
Yeah, there were 5.
I stopped counting after a while. 5 new ones came in, and I'm a firm believer that education on the front end. Do you think that more can be done for MP orientation to ensure that there is a comprehensive understanding of the code, i.e., ignorance can't be an excuse down the line?
Lynn here is the expert. This will answer.
Yes, she is very much
Let
that.
me just say before, and it's not only what we offer, but what people attend. And part of the problem is getting people to be spending enough time to be informed. We do what we can to inform them. But Lynn, here you are the expert on this.
Yes, and as most of you are probably aware, the members' code was modified last June to include a mandatory training session for all new MPs. Therefore, within the 120 days following their name in the publication of their name in the Canada Gazette, the member has to have training with our office. And so we actually communicated with the 5 new members, informed them of this obligation, and scheduled training for them. So yes, it was a recommendation made from previous commissioners. The Procedures and House Affairs Committee has granted that, and therefore now it is part of the obligations of new members.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you, Ms. Dalby. Mr. Commissioner, you're going to be the recipient of a longer microphone here, where the interpreters, you're speaking just a little
into the mic.
there. I think that might be a little
Interpreters,
bit
I hope
better,
you
but
hear me clearly.
That's okay. I like the calm demeanor. So, en avance de commencer avec.
Before moving on with the next round, and we'll start with Mr. Gould, I have a question.
That you've been busy over the course of the last several weeks. One of the things that consistently comes up is the Conflict of Interest Act itself. As you know, it came into effect in 2007. There was the statutory review in 2013. Then my understanding is there was prorogation. The act was then introduced again, it was tabled in the House in 2014. It's been 9 years since the act has been reviewed. Have you come to any conclusion or thought about whether the Conflict of Interest Act itself needs to be reviewed?
You have to ask me that. I can only answer generally. I think any legislation after that long period of time, as you mentioned, deserves to be reviewed, because things do change, and especially in this age of social media, etc., we have to see whether some of the procedures or some of the way we looked at it, which were based on a paper world, really still make sense or can be improved in this day and age.
Merci, Monsieur Commissaire.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. We'll start with the next round. Mr. Gould, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, congratulations on your appointment. Earlier, you mentioned needing experienced people, but your interim mandate is only 6 months long, and a regular mandate for a commissioner is 7 years. Would that 7-year mandate limit the candidates? Because that's a long mandate. Because of the experience requirements, people might be of a certain age, and so would the length of the mandate limit the candidates? Answer. A person who accepts the appointment can step down. It's not mandatory to complete the 7 years. Secondly, it's a positive thing. It gives you the time to reform the organization and make changes. If you're only there for 4 years, sometimes it's not enough time to make the changes that you would like to see. It takes a lot of time to make any changes to the act or to the code. And so 7 years is an advantage, but as you said, it can be a bit of an issue. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I'll come back to the interim mandate. There are investigations that sometimes take 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. If you receive on your desk an investigation that was started by your predecessor or by your team that's already working very well, you're the one who has to look at it and sign the final report. If you stay in your interim position for 6 months, if you are not able to finalize an investigation, would your predecessor have to start from the very beginning, or? Answer: we don't have to start at zero. We can see the details of the case and decide whether or not the explanations are sufficient, or perhaps if there's something that isn't clear or ambiguous, then we can ask to start again. But in general, if there's a case that was started by someone else, we'll ask ourselves, do I need to start again? Is it a matter of credibility? Or is it a simple matter of facts and documents? If there's no credibility issue, then we'll just continue what was started. If there's a matter of credibility, then we'll have to start over, because that's on a case-by-case matter. Because at the end of the day, the final decision would be mine, so I'd have to see whether or not to restart what was given to me. I have 1 minute. Okay, so if I understand you correctly, if throughout the process for a case, there's something that you find iffy or that you find concerning, you could ask for the investigation to start again, and that could take 2 to 3 months. And if it takes longer than that, and your mandate ends, your successor might ask for things to start again. That is possible, correct? I don't think it's very likely. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Gould. And Mr. Commissioner, Ms. Hefner, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Interim Commissioner, for joining us so early in your mandate, and Ms. Robinson-Dalpé as well. It's good to have you here answering our questions. I would like to take you back. You've mentioned a couple of times about your experience on the bench, and as someone who covered criminal court for many years, I'm wondering if there are other aspects of that role as judge that you would bring to our ethical framework here in Canada, or sensibilities, or you know what I'm saying?
First of all, I didn't do criminal cases. I only did civil cases. Okay, I was in the federal court. So I dealt mostly with a judicial review, which is basically the process, looking at the process, making sure the process was properly followed. People had the necessary jurisdiction, came to the necessary conclusion, and the conclusions were reasonably defendable. That's really, you don't redo the situation unless it's unreasonable. So, which is very close to what we have here. In effect, here that you have a rule, you have rules, you have a code, you have an act. You have a situation, and what is the legal arrangement? Is this reasonable? Does it produce a reasonable? You know, you have to apply a certain amount of common sense there. Secondly, if I think, and what you always have in mind when you are judged, not only I make this decision, but what are the unintended consequences or side effects, etc. I'm deciding this little issue, and that's clear. That's clear. But having decided that, does it have secondary or tertiary effects which can be very negative or which nobody had taken into account? Same thing when I was Commissioner of Competition or Chairman of the CRTR. We always worried about the unintended consequences. And it's something here too. You know, I will deal with somebody's conflict and, you know, try to, but I also have very much in mind what is the making sure there are no unintended consequences, or there at least to the extent that I can foresee them, they're acceptable.
Thank you. And going back to the changes in how new public office holders are informed of their duties under the Act, maybe you can explain the difference. And now, say for members who weren't just sworn in this week, how are they informed of their obligations on an ongoing basis?
Then I think that's your domain.
As most of you are aware, there's the annual review process that all members have to go through, and reporting public office holders have to go through on an annual basis. And therefore, that is an excellent opportunity for members and public office holders to exchange with their advisors and ask questions or be more sensitized to you know, their obligations under the regimes. There is also ongoing training that is provided from the office on a monthly basis. There are emails sent out to current or new public office holders to invite them to training. But we also offer training to any member or their offices. So if you do want any training, we will gladly provide that training to you.
And would you say that engagement with your office has increased over the years, and in what ways, if so?
I would say definitely. I think I spoke about the quarterly report, and in there's some statistics as to how many people participate actually in the training sessions that we offer. And you know, levels are getting pretty high. People are wanting to learn more about the rules, the application, and our interpretation of the rules, because they need to know how they apply to them so that they abide by the rules. So essentially, we are doing a lot of outreach, either through formal training or also on our website. So I encourage you to follow up with our office and take advantage of those sessions.
And further to that, do you have any other advice for public office holders who may be watching this today?
Sure, did you want to give advice? Or?
Yeah, I think that what my colleague said is really the advice, you know. Go get yourself informed before you do anything, because you are now in a job where you're going to be under a certain amount on a magnifying glass. Your actions are going to be watched, and they can have negative consequences for you. So if you're informed, you won't do them, and if you need any help, come to her. We'll all have the door open to give you free advice.
Thank you. Can I just
yes,
add on
please
that?
go ahead. Yep.
And please be mindful, all advice that is provided by our office is confidential. So you can call our office at any point in time. It is strictly confidential. We will not publish or comment on any of this information publicly.
Okay, thank you. And if you think it's a conflict, it probably is a conflict. Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Heppner, Mr. Commissioner, and Ms. Robinson-Dalpé. We're going to go 5 minutes, right? Je comprends, Monsieur Villemure, que vous n'avez.
Mr. Villemure, if I understood correctly, you don't have any other questions?
And then a couple of minutes for Ms. Khalid. And I think you're going to get off easy today, Commissioner. So go ahead, Mr. Kirk, for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. And I'll pick up on a little bit where my colleague left off, because I believe there are 2 new parliamentary secretaries that have been appointed from what is the membership of this committee. Maybe that's, I understand that there could be some changes. However, Commissioner, the outgoing commissioner, in the aftermath of the hot water that Cabinet Minister Mary Ng found herself in a sole source contract with her campaign manager, best friend, the recommendation that was made by the former commissioner, just basically as he had announced that he would be retiring, he said that cabinet ministers and parliamentary secretaries should take remedial training. So my question, Commissioner, is have any cabinet ministers or parliamentary secretaries taken the office of the Conflict of Interest Commissioner up on that recommendation that they take remedial training in light of those comments and that recommendation that was made by your predecessor?
Can you define remedial training?
Supplementary training, a refresher course, I think was. I certainly wouldn't want to put words in the mouth of the former commissioner, but he was very frustrated that it seemed like public office holders were negligent in their either understanding, but certainly in their following the rules of the Act. So I'm curious if your office did in fact receive any requests by ministers or parlsecs in the follow-up to making that recommendation. What's getting to be, I believe that was in December that he made those comments.
As you've heard, I think many times, that everything we do is confidential. And I think if there is somebody who feels he has dealt with us before, he hasn't understood it, and he wants more, it says, I was specifically want this, etc. It comes very close to seeking confidential advice. So I really can't comment on your question.
Well, I think a question that should be asked to certainly maybe the Liberal government writ large is if all of their cabinet ministers and parliamentary secretaries have taken that remedial question. So certainly that's something that I'd be happy to ask them. Commissioner, the investigations process, because it's a quasi-judicial process and your expertise and whatnot lends to your credibility, I believe, in this role. But Commissioner Dion had shared a list of 49 questions that are asked to somebody who is being investigated that are standard and asked in the case that somebody is in fact being investigated. Commissioner, I'm wondering if it would be possible for you to table that and share any more about what an investigation might look like. And the reason I ask is Canadians see your role and your office as key to that trust that is required with public office holders, and for them to understand what takes place during an investigation, the thoroughness of an investigation, I think would be very, very valuable. So we heard about a list of 49 questions. It'd be great if you could table that. But if you could outline a little bit of the investigation, what an investigation would look like if somebody found themselves in one.
Well, it really depends on what the allegation is and what you do with it. It's not. That's exactly what we don't do as a pro forma, etc. And these are the questions that we ask, etc. We look at what is the issue, what are the allegations, what are the rules that apply, and then we will question obviously the person who makes the allegation. We will question the person who's a subject to allegation and any other witnesses who have something relevant to say. And on the basis of that, we will then make a decision. The decision will explain exactly who we talk to, what we asked them, and what we heard, and what conclusion we drew, and whether we found something credible or not credible. Doing what you just suggest, at first glance looks logical, but actually it does exactly the thing I don't want to do. These are individual cases for people who have a particular problem, etc. And we want to make sure that we deal with that problem in a fair and honest way in accordance with the court. I don't want to come in with a pre-forma approach or a line of questions which drives you towards a certain solution, because that's not serving either the person nor the public. What I want to know, the public made an allegation, or somebody made an allegation about this. This is for the allegations. Here are the rules. Here is what we did, and therefore the result is yes or no. And that's the only way you can deal. You can't have. You should not proceed with a preset questions and preset, because to a very large extent that drives your investigation in a certain direction, which is exactly what you don't want to do. You want to be able to judge it on the basis of the person who is subject to the allegations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Ms. Khalid, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate that. And thank you, Mr. Commissioner, for your time today. We really appreciate it and the hard work that you do for Canadians and for our Parliament in ensuring oversight. I just wanted to follow up on kind of an intersectionalities between a lot of questions that are being asked. I know my colleague had asked about the role of social media in kind of having an impromptu parallel, inquiry, if you may, in terms of, whether to come to a conclusion of guilty or innocent. We know the hyper-partisan nature and the extreme polarization, not just here in Canada, but across the world, when it comes to ensuring trust in public institutions. I'd really like to understand what you think about that, and what are the measures, perhaps, that we can use to ensure that before your results, before you make a decision, that a decision is not made in the public space beforehand?
I don't think there's an answer to that. I don't think you can prevent the social media or the public to preform their formed in instant judgment or to listen to social media and come to a conclusion. The only thing we can do that in the end of the process, A, have credibility in the process, B, as I mentioned several times, be as transparent as possible so that people understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, where we're going. And then when it comes out, explain it in terms that people understand. Don't hide it behind legalese. Don't cite the act all the time, etc. But in effect, put it in real terms so people understand, oh, that's what the situation the man was in, and this is what he did. And then say, unfortunately, in some cases, that may have been perfectly okay. Seems reasonable under the circumstances, but it doesn't. It violated the rules. Or on the opposite, yes, it was perfectly, and actually the person did seek advice, followed the advice, and therefore, although it looks shady, it was actually perfectly permitted under the rules. That's the best you can do.
I appreciate that, and I'll just, the last, I think, point that we'll have in this committee, I just want to know, what is your take with respect to trust in public institutions, and as the interim ethics commissioner, what do you envision the role of the office and of yourself in ensuring that that public trust is maintained?
Well, it's a bit of a repeat of what I just said before. I think it's clearly all public institutions, including ours, is under trust or lack of credibility, and etc. Well, what we have, our prime task has to be to restore the public trust. And it can only be by being transparent, by open, but also communicating what we do as much as we can, and communicate it clearly and precisely. And to the extent that we can use social media, by all means, let's use them. If people want, if that's how they receive their news, then fine. I'll offer it for social media. There's no problem for it. But just make sure that there's nothing in there that that either can be twisted, which somebody will, and secondly, that is not clear. You've got to be clear. It's got to be understandable to the common man. I'm not writing for a legal scholar. I'm not writing for the law school. I'm writing for the people who vote. And do they understand what the ruling is and why we find somebody has had a conflict or doesn't have a conflict?
Thank you very, very much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Khalid. Thank you, Commissioner. That concludes our round of questioning. I've met a lot of political junkies in my life. By extension, we're all political junkies. I've never met a public service junkie before. So Commissioner, I want to thank you for taking the time, and also Ms. Robinson Dalpé for taking the time today to come before the committee. And thank you, sir, for accepting this role on an interim basis. I think, your public service speaks for itself, and that service to Canadians speaks for itself. And I'm not speaking on behalf of the committee, but as chair of the committee, you've given me quite a bit of confidence today in the way you responded to the questions and the way that you are going to conduct yourself as commissioner on an interim basis. That concludes the meeting for today. I do want to say to committee members, on Wednesday we've got committee business. As of now, it's scheduled in camera. We did receive the interim report on our foreign interference study that came. The report, which came to our accounts on Friday. Remind all members that that is still confidential. We've not dealt with that. I expect that we'll have a discussion about this during committee business on Wednesday. We're going to talk about the schedule heading into the fall, as well as the report. So that concludes today's meeting. Thank you, sir, on behalf of the committee, and thank you on behalf of Canadians. Meeting is adjourned.